They get everything kind of, and then you have these leaders who we read about in the New Testament, but we're not disciples. We read about Linus in 2 Timothy 4:21. He's an Italian from Tuscany, so clearly a Gentile follower. He is the second pope, I believe, in 67 AD. Irenaeus says that he followed Peter, 67 AD. He died in 76, but we don't know that he was martyred, where almost all the other leaders of the church were eventually
But he
martyred.
replaced Peter.
Peter, right? Peter, then...
Why did he got a hole in his head?
It's one of these little, it's a medieval picture. It's one of these little, it's like almost a phylactery, but it's hair. It's a little bit of hair in his head. You can go with that look, actually. I think you get something more right there,
Very good.
You know, the issue with the whole, this we got into this when the Lutherans were making agreements with the Episcopals. The Episcopal Church follows the Roman practice of apostolic succession. So what they say is that we can trace every priest in existence today all the way back to Peter by the laying on of hands. Even though there was a period in the Middle Ages, of course, where there were 3 popes. And we don't know which hands, counted and which ones didn't. I don't know. We also, some of the records are very sketchy, who laid hands on who, which is why Lutherans claim the succession is the gospel, apostolic succession of the message, and Episcopals and Roman Church, the Catholic Church would say it's the succession of the laying on of hands. I remember when we were having all these meetings with the Episcopal priests in our area, and before the Episcopal diocese got into all the controversy they got into recently, so they were somewhat intact. And Bishop Diker, maybe is his name? We're over at his seat, the cathedral, a bunch of other priests and Lutherans sitting at the table. I remember this one guy, we're sitting at the table, we're talking about stuff, and there were other things to talk about. And he goes to me, well, now, no offense, but, Christ isn't present at your table.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, offense taken. Okay. So, but they have that thought that if you're not within that succession, then you can't preside at the table. It's not legitimate. And so it was actually harder for Episcopals to accept Lutherans than to accept Episcopals. And the way that we did it, in typical Lutheran fashion, tried to find a way to kind of go around the rules. And so we just said, okay, from here on out, any Lutheran bishop will have an Episcopal bishop present when we, and we don't ordain bishops, they just simply take on a new job, right? Because we vote bishops in, where Episcopals are in for life. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But Linus is the second one of those folks. Clement of Rome, we read about him, Clement, in Philippians 4:3. These are usually these lists of people. You get it in Romans too, right? And that's the interesting list in Romans, because you have listed there Junia, who is a female apostle. But what happened, so if you read Romans 16, it talks about Junia in the most, the ancient of the Greek texts that we can find. So the oldest Greek texts have this name as Junia, which is a female form of the name, and it's said to be an apostle. There's later texts that happen that the name's been changed to Junius. Now it's a male name. So it looks like what happened is the Roman Church said, well, we can't have a female apostle. That doesn't make sense. Let's, we're going to make sure that we change that, right? He's consecrated by Peter according to Tertullian. Now notice that Tertullian's born in 160. So, I mean, how does he know it? So these are all the legends of the stories that we've been told. First Clement, he writes to the Corinthian Christians. We have his letters. He asserts the apostolic authority of bishops and elders. So what's happening in the church is you begin with this kind of fluid motion. You've got some leaders popping up now. It's all starting to get kind of nailed down. Okay, we're going to have bishops and elders and presbyters and deacons, and there's a whole hierarchy happening. And sooner or later it's going to take over, and it's going to look just like the Roman hierarchy. And that's how we end up with pontiffs and bishops in this order of priests. Clement is martyred in 101 AD. All right, so Tacitus here. So far, all we've had are Christian sources. So we work out of the New Testament as best we can, knowing that they included some things that it didn't include other things. Knowing that Luke wasn't a part of the early Christians. I mean, wasn't part of Jesus' life, but as a historian who's going to collect all the stories and write them down. He understands Paul's ministry one way, Paul understands it a different way. So we've got lots of different, but basically they're all on the same kind of page. Now we're looking at hostile sources that have no reason to support Christianity at all, or even talk about it as if it's true. But here Tacitus says, Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty, that's crucifixion, during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for a moment, again about, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Tacitus was not a big fan of Rome. He was always a critic of all their excess. And,
Las Vegas.
Yeah. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, down upon their information, and an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred against mankind. So Christians were thought to hate mankind. Why? Because they didn't care about this world. And in the beginning, that was very true. They were willing to be martyred. And they actually wanted to be martyred because they didn't know, how can you be a Christian if you're not killed? Because Jesus was crucified. Therefore, we should be crucified. Or we should be persecuted. Or we should be stoned or killed. And that's when we descend into this next world.
The first evidence of feeling guilty.
Yeah, right, yeah.
If I'm a Christian, I think I'd have to do something wrong.
That's right, exactly. I'm not being faithful.
That's right.
Yeah, well, exactly. And they all, even Paul, they have to encourage him to try and get away. No, Paul, we need you to run. And when he's in the city and he's being surrounded, they're coming to get him. Get out of here. We need you to stay alive. This is a letter to this is the apology now. So what we have going on in this period is you have Romans writing about Christians, and then you have what are called apologists who write about. So this letter to Diogenes, we don't know who wrote it. It's an anonymous source, but a Christian writing about who they are. So the they is Christians. Christians dwell in their own country simply as sojourners. They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws, and at the same time they surpass the laws by their lives. They love all men, but are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death, but will be restored to life. They are poor, yet they make many rich. They possess few things, yet they abound in all. They are dishonored, but in their very dishonor are glorified. And those who hate them are unable to give any reason for their hatred. So there's the defense of the faith. They're saying, hey, we're good people. We follow the laws. Why are you persecuting us? Here's the other side of the story. This is the pagan source. They despise the temples as houses of the dead. They reject the gods. They laugh at sacred things. Wretched, they pity our priests. Half naked themselves, they despise honors and purple robes. What incredible audacity and foolishness. They're not afraid of present torments, but they fear those that are uncertain in future. While they do not fear to die for the present, they fear to die after death. So these people are crazy. Why would they do that? Why would they despise these things, except that they hate all people and they're fanatics? At least learn from your present situation, you wretched people. So this is the pagan source going on. What actually awaits you after death? See, many of you, in fact, by your own admission, the majority of you are in want, are cold, are hungry, are laboring in hard work, yet your God allows it. So this is logical. You guys are favored by God. Look at your lives. He is either unwilling or unable to assist his people, so he's either weak or unjust. Take notice. For you, there are threats, punishments, tortures, and crosses. Where's the God who is supposed to help you when you come back from the dead? He cannot even help you in this life. Not the Romans, without any help from your God, govern, rule over, and have the enjoyment of the whole world, including dominion over you yourselves. So the pagans are saying, listen, this doesn't make sense. You clearly have followed the wrong God. Why don't you just give that up and get in line? And a lot of Christians then listen to this and cross over. We have, in the book of Revelation, it talks about the fact that you can't buy or sell. Was in fact going on within, especially in Asia Minor, the areas where the Jewish or the Romans when they took over Asia Minor, they took over areas that were Persian in their understanding. So the Persians had no problem with believing that their kings were gods. The Romans, even if they said sooner or later, that Nero, those guys claimed to be gods, they didn't really believe it. They were, well, yeah, it's foolish, but it's the way it works, it's the system. But the Persian Empire really did believe in God. Like you see in the movie, like the 300, right? Spartacus, where the guy's God, and believe, even though he gets cut, spoiler alert, cut at the end. So they have a notion that you can be a god. And what they did is they took the heads of Roman emperors and they stuck them on the statues of the Persian gods or Persian emperors. And so there was very much in that region an idea that our emperor is God. Therefore, the Christians had to sacrifice at the altar of the Roman God, or they couldn't participate in commerce. And so they were really excluded from the whole social life of the community, and could not participate in it. Oh, that's the end of that one. Let me see if I can get the next, go into session 2. Any questions or comments? It's a lot of stuff I'm talking about. We got a little waiting, so let's just go on a little bit. This is one of the most fascinating documents that we have. It's called the Didache, and it's the teaching of the 12 disciples. It's late 1st century or early 2nd century, so what this represents are writings that are not canonical, not part of the Bible, but reflect kind of on the ground what was happening, at least in this one area. It was recognized as the canon by some people. Remember that the Bible really doesn't get cemented or into a canon until into the 4th century sometime, after Constantine. In fact, it still was fairly fluid even going into the later time. And that's why Luther even can take certain books of the Bible and put a list of them and put the 3 books that he didn't, or 4 books he didn't hold as being as authoritative. So Revelation, Galatians, Hebrews, and James, as were separated out by a space. So the canon even then was somewhat fluid, but it was pretty well, everybody accepted what were the canonical books by the end of the 4th century. But the Didache was in the running, at least. So it was in the running right up almost to the end. There were other things that almost made it as well. It calls it the 2 ways. It talks about the 2 ways to live. It details all kinds of rituals. It has talks about ministry roles and prophetic roles. So it really is kind of detailing. It's like a handbook. It's like the same thing that they give us when we go to seminary, right? A manual for, okay, where do you stand at the altar? How do you put your hands? What's the nature of the ministry work? What kind of prayers do you pray? It's really, and then it has a conclusion. So I'm giving. Do not hesitate to give, nor complain when you give, for you shall know who is the good repayer of the hire. Do not turn away from him who is in want. Rather share all things with your brother, and do not say that they are your own. For if you are partakers in that which is immortal, how much more in things which are mortal? So the Didache establishes very much the Christian understanding that we are to be generous. It's interesting that where we talk about stewardship in one way, their way of doing stewardship was the people, and we have this captured not just in the Bible, but if I have that slide, but other places as well, that it was the people of means. So if you were a person of means, at the end of the service, you would contribute your money, and that money would be taken directly to the poor. There was no sense that you were supporting some kind of infrastructure, even though Paul says that laborer deserves his wages. So Paul's ministry was to do tent making and then to do ministry. But there was clearly, shortly after him, a time when the leaders were paid, or at least provided for. But most of the giving was directed to the poor. It was not for supporting any kind of infrastructure. Partly because they didn't have buildings. They didn't need them, right? When we think about what we're doing downtown at Kyrie, at Zio Carlo, we have no overhead costs at all, as long as we keep buying beer and pizza. So, we do that, we have a place to land. But we can do it down there. There's no overhead costs. There's no, the staff cost, of course, is carried by Calvary, because Ethan and I are in it, and Eric at Trinity. But there's no staff costs, ultimately. There's some cost for a musician, when we pay them, and some advertising. And it's very much of a first century model. You find a place that will welcome you, and you do it there. And you don't have a big building. It wasn't until the Romans took over the church. I mean, the church kind of got into the Romans, but the Romans took over the church pretty quickly after that. Once it became clear that Constantine had made the church of the empire, the church started to look a lot like the empire. Some people would say that the worst day of the church's history was when Constantine made Christianity the church of the empire. That's when we lost any kind of legitimate critical voice against the empire. We became part of the empire and supported everything that they did. Baptism. And concerning baptism, in this manner baptized. When you have gone over these things, baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in running water. So it doesn't have to be immersion, it just has to be running, or has to be moving, because it's living. So running water is living water. And in this manner baptized, when you've gone over these things, there was a long period of catechesis, we call it, where you were trained and taught. If you were a soldier, you had to wait until you were retired in order to be a Christian. You couldn't be a soldier to be a Christian. If you were an actor, you had to retire from acting, because acting often included acting out cultic plays. You could be an actor and be a Christian. And there were lots of rules, and it was very, very, very tightly controlled. And you went through a period of like 3 years of instruction before finally you were allowed to be a Christian. If you do not have running water, baptize in other water. If you are not able to use cold water, use warm. If you have neither, pour water on the head 3 times in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And before baptism, the one baptizing and the one to be baptized should fast, as well as any others who are able. And you should instruct the one being baptized to fast 1 or 2 days before. So here we have, this goes back to the beginning of the 2nd century, so the very early time in the Christian tradition, you have people being baptized by sprinkling. Just 3 things of water, that'll do. Or if you have running water, do that. There's no immersion at all, at least for the D.K. Probably because they live in the desert. It makes sense. And then the fasting piece, though. So there was very much an idea that this was preparing for something. All right, I'm going to end there, and next week we'll pick it up. I'm going to try and get at least to I'll look through the slides and maybe pick some out. I want to get to some of the heresies of the 3rd century, because that's kind of fascinating stuff where we still see some of those things that work today. Any questions before we quick go?
Well, in my history class, in Greek up until the Roman, the church was basically the center of a city or a city-state, and all the economy flowed in and out of it. And kind of what you just said is early Christian, it was not that way at all.
No.
Because they were not a part of that.
Right, exactly. They were not a part at all. In fact, they set up in houses mostly, and often wealthy people, which is why the most radical edge of Christianity was that on the Lord's Day, and we read this in a book like Philemon, and Philemon particularly, but on the Lord's Day, in the dining room of the rich person's home, everyone would gather together around the table. And that means slave would be eating next to master and the people of the house. So on that day, everybody was somehow equal. It was a radical departure from society, which is again why the Romans were really keen on stamping this out. They were going to disrupt all of society. Slaves no longer be slaves anymore because they're brothers and sisters of the Lord. How are we going to keep our whole system going if they allow them to break free from that? But once Rome took over, then the basilica became the church. So basically they just took over the Roman temple, which was in the center of town, which then had all the structure of the Roman bureaucratic organization. And the Roman Catholic Church, their structure is Roman bureaucratic offices. Yeah, they just kind of said, oh, that makes sense, let's just make this, it all fit together. And before you know it, the church is doing exactly what the temple did for Rome. All right, good, thanks. I'm going to head down the hall and right there. I know. Well, you train so much in, right?
Oh, I know, they're talking about 3 weeks, so I came to this year. Hearing the whole sermon. So I finally found
I try and slow down. That's right, take it back and listen.
Fair trade.
Texas for 23 years from up north. I remember she
Right, and I was gonna say, to expand it. I think we're gonna see if we can. I want to stick around for the next question. Well, I have the 8 o'clock. So, I mean, I'm going to. Right, yes, so we got 25 minutes or so. Yeah. Let me go get that. Unless it's yeah. So this week. Thank you. We'll be right back. It goes on and on. Hopefully soon.
The new year, you just went to the 35, and the east side of it is Keller, the west side of it is Dover. Yeah. Other two live here in this area, they're Sarah, who's living in the next one.
Right.
Yeah, she lives in Portland.
So she's the only one that's kind of out of the way there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Portland's a nice, I've been to Portland one time. What was nice there?
Well, the area is just beautiful to look at, and you hear the garden, and gorgeous. I mean, and she said that they're, you know, crafting the entire section is like filled with moss, you know?
Because they've got moisture all the time, got a little bit of rain out there. So. But the area when I flew into Portland and drove with someone else, with another group of guys to a seminar, I think it was in Corvallis. All that whole trip through there was all like, there were vineyards all over.
Oh, yes.
Up on these hillsides and stuff.
It's just beautiful. Me personally, I just want 2 more days of sun.
Yeah, that's probably, when I was there, they said that's the
Most of the time, that's not, I come to visit, and I'm like, oh, this is and I thought, you know, my husband was Denmark.
Yeah.
I need more sun.
I need sun too.
It's nice to visit, but they live there, so they're coming to visit. Yeah. Okay.
I have my name tag in my car.
And I see you in Mardell all the time.
You see me?
Don't I see you in Mardell?
Probably not. Maybe somebody was.
Maybe it must be.
Now, Bart